Those ugly weeds are killing our property values. Get rid of them.
HOA Karen bleached my wildflowers for a better view. By morning, 3 state university trucks were at my gate, and the HOA had a $600,000 problem. She did not know I had 11 years of research records proving exactly what she destroyed. If you like watching bullies lose to evidence, subscribe, because that file was only the beginning. 3 weeks earlier, Patty Weller showed up at my gate with a clipboard in one hand and a real estate flyer in the other. Behind her, 3 new luxury homes were being staged for the HOA showcase weekend. She did not ask about my property. She pointed at the wildflower meadow beside my barn. That has to go. I looked at the field, then back at her. Why? Because people are paying over $1 million for those homes, she said. They should not have to look at an overgrown weed patch. My 14 acres sat beside the subdivision, but they were not part of the HOA. Patty knew that. I also knew she could see the small numbered stakes scattered throughout the meadow. That area is being monitored, I told her. She stared at the markers, then laughed. By who? The Department of Dandelions? I did not explain. I just said, "Do not touch anything on this side of the fence." Her smile tightened. "You are hurting everyone's property values, Daniel." Then she walked back to her white SUV. 3 days later, the HOA sent me its first violation notice. And that was when I realized Patty was not asking anymore. The first notice called my meadow a visual nuisance. The second called it a fire hazard. By the end of the week, Patty had added community standards, neighborhood character, and property value protection to the list. It all sounded official. None of it applied to me. I pulled my deed, the county parcel map, and the original subdivision boundary. Parcel 18B sat outside the HOA. So I sent Patty one certified letter. Please identify the covenant that gives your association authority over my property. She never answered that question. Instead, I got another warning threatening corrective landscaping action if I refused to cooperate. That phrase bothered me. Not because I thought they had the right, because it sounded like they had already decided what they were going to do. My late wife, Claire, used to tell me, if something matters, document it before people start changing their story. So I made a folder. Every notice, every envelope, every date, and every message from Patty. 4 days before the showcase, the letters suddenly stopped. That should have made me feel better. It did not. Thursday morning, I drove into town for replacement fittings for an irrigation pump. I was gone less than 2 hours. At 10:11, the camera over my barn caught Patty's white SUV pulling onto the shoulder. She stepped through my fence with a landscaping worker carrying 2 plastic chemical containers. The audio was clear. Patty pointed across the meadow. Use something strong. I do not want anything growing back before Saturday. The worker hesitated when he reached the numbered research stakes. Patty did not. All the way to those little markers. Then they started pouring. Long, pale streams soaked into the grass, flowers, and soil. Before they left, Patty stood at the edge of the field, took a picture, and posted it to the HOA group. Eyesore handled, ready for showcase weekend. I smelled the chlorine before I even shut off my truck. Half the meadow was already turning yellow. Some of the smaller flowers had collapsed completely. I walked straight to the weatherproof sensor box beside the plot. The soil readings had jumped sharply at exactly 10:14 a.m. Then I opened the camera footage. I watched Patty point. I watched the chemicals hit the ground. I watched her smile. I did not call her. I called Dr. Maya Chen. When she answered, I said only 6 words. Someone contaminated Plot 7 this morning. There was a long silence. Then Maya said, Daniel, do not touch anything. By 8 the next morning, 3 state university vehicles were parked along my driveway. Dr. Maya Chen got out first, followed by 2 graduate researchers carrying sample kits, cameras, and sealed containers. Nobody wasted time. They marked the contaminated area, photographed every numbered stake, and started pulling soil samples from both the burned section and the untouched ground beyond it. One of the researchers crouched beside a collapsed plant and whispered, some of these had not even flowered yet. That was when Patty drove past. She slowed, saw the university logos, and pulled over. What is all this? She asked. I looked at the dead meadow. You wanted the weeds gone. They are documenting what you removed. Patty folded her arms. Good luck convincing anyone weeds are worth money. Maya had been standing 10 feet away. She looked at me, then back at Patty. She really does not know, does she? Patty rolled her eyes and drove off. Maya waited until the SUV disappeared. Then she said quietly, Daniel, we need Claire's old research records. And suddenly, this was not about dead flowers anymore. Claire had noticed the first orchid 11 years earlier. She was a high school biology teacher, the kind of person who could walk through a field everyone else ignored, and somehow spot the one thing that did not belong. One spring afternoon, she found several small terrestrial orchids growing between the native grasses. They were not bright or dramatic. Most people would have stepped right over them. Claire took photographs and sent them to the State University Herbarium. A week later, Maya came out to inspect the site. That visit turned into a long-term research project. The university tagged individual plants and began tracking bloom cycles, soil moisture, pollinators, temperature, and genetic samples. Claire helped with the early field notes. Even after she got sick, she kept asking me whether the orchids had bloomed. After cancer took her, I kept the agreement with the university. Not because I understood all the science. I did not. I kept it because Claire believed the field mattered. That was why seeing those burned plants hurt more than Patty could possibly understand. But Maya was not looking at the meadow like someone mourning flowers. She was looking at it like someone examining a destroyed laboratory. Then she turned to me. Daniel, the orchids are not the biggest loss. I stared at her. What could be bigger than losing the plants? She looked toward the numbered stakes. Losing 11 years. Maya knelt beside one of the blackened markers and pushed a soil probe into the ground. Bleach does not just kill what you can see, she said. The orchids depended on a fragile relationship between the plants, the soil, and microscopic fungi around their roots. Once the chemistry changed, the damage did not stop with the flowers. It changed the environment they had been measuring for years. The team had tracked individual plants through wet seasons, droughts, late freezes, and unusually warm springs. Some had been tagged before they ever bloomed. Others had been followed through multiple flowering cycles. Now several were dead, and part of the control area had been chemically contaminated. I asked the obvious question. Can you not just replant them? Maya shook her head. You can replace a plant, Daniel. You cannot replace its history. That hit me harder than I expected. 11 years of observations could not be bought at a nursery. They could not be recreated next spring. Maya stood and looked toward my house. Claire kept copies of the early records, did she not? I knew exactly what she meant. There was an old binder on a shelf in Claire's study. I had not opened it in years. Maya looked at me. We need that file. The binder was exactly where Claire had left it. Gray cover. Faded label. Plot 7C. Continuity record. I carried it outside and set it on the hood of Maya's SUV. She opened it carefully. Inside were 11 years of maps, GPS coordinates, specimen numbers, annual photographs, bloom records, soil readings, sensor calibrations, and copies of the university access agreement. Claire's handwriting was still in the margins. Dates, weather notes, tiny observations most people would never think mattered. Maya stopped on one page and tapped a column of specimen IDs. This is what proves continuity. I frowned. Meaning? Meaning we can show exactly which plants were here, how long they were tracked, and what data was tied to each one. She turned another page. There were photographs of the same orchids across multiple years, then the sensor logs, then the genetic sample references. This was not just a folder full of memories. It was a chain of evidence. Maya closed the binder. Daniel, I need to send this to University Counsel. That afternoon, the State University Office of General Counsel opened a formal file. Patty still thought she was dealing with me over landscaping. She was not. And by the next morning, the HOA received a letter telling them to preserve every email, text, invoice, and instruction connected to my field. Patty's first move was exactly what I expected. She blamed the landscaper. In an email to the board, she claimed she had only asked for basic vegetation cleanup, and that the worker had chosen the chemicals on his own. That story lasted less than 24 hours. The landscaping company hired an attorney, and their attorney handed over Patty's text messages. The first one said, "Use something strong." The second was worse. "I need it dead before the buyers arrive." Then came the one that ended any argument about whether this had been a mistake. "Do not worry about the owner. I will handle him." Maya read the messages twice. I did not need to. But there was one more document. The invoice. It did not say routine mowing. It did not say weed trimming. It said chemical vegetation clearing, showcase prep. And the payment had not come from Patty's personal account. It had been paid directly from the HOA landscaping fund. That changed everything. Now the university was not looking at one angry woman trespassing on my property. They were looking at an HOA-funded operation. And when the lawyers asked who had approved that payment, the paper trail led straight back to the board. The board tried to distance itself from Patty. The records made that difficult. University Counsel requested the emails connected to the landscaping payment. One board member had written, "Is Mercer going to fight us on this?" Patty replied, "By the time he notices, it will already be cleaned up." Another message was even shorter. "Keep it under landscaping." I read that line twice. So they knew it was not theirs. Maya nodded. They knew there was a dispute, and they spent HOA money anyway. That was when the association's insurance carrier got involved. Suddenly, nobody on the board wanted to be the person who had approved anything. Patty started telling residents that I was trying to bankrupt the neighborhood over a patch of flowers. I was not asking them for anything. The university was still calculating what had actually been lost. Then an envelope arrived from the HOA's attorney. Inside was a settlement agreement and a check for $4,500. All I had to do was sign away every future claim and agree not to discuss what happened. I looked at the check. Then I called Maya. She did not even let me finish. "Daniel, do not sign that." I was not planning to. That was all I told Maya. The agreement said the $4,500 would settle the matter as ordinary landscaping damage. Dead plants. Soil cleanup. Case closed. It also required me to release the HOA from any future claims and keep the settlement confidential. I put the check back in the envelope. No counteroffer. No angry letter. I mailed it straight back. Because by then, this was not my landscaping dispute anymore. The university had laboratory results confirming chemical contamination. They had Patty's messages. They had the HOA invoice. They had the camera footage. And they had Claire's 11-year research file. 2 days later, State University Council completed its preliminary damages package. Patty apparently told the board they might be facing $20,000 or $30,000, maybe $50,000 if the university pushed hard. Then their attorney reached the final page. The number printed there was $600,000. And for the first time since this started, Patty stopped talking about weeds. The university was not claiming those orchids were worth $600,000 as flowers. That would have been ridiculous. The number came from everything Patty's bleach had destroyed around them. The contaminated soil had to be tested and remediated. Some tagged specimens were gone permanently. Years of continuous observations had been broken. Future comparisons were compromised. The university had to account for new sampling, laboratory analysis, replacement sensors, specialist fieldwork, restoration, grant disruption, and years of monitoring that could no longer continue as planned. I stared at the damages summary. $600,000? For one field? Maya shook her head. Not for one field. She placed Claire's binder on the table between us. For 11 years, nobody can put back. That was the part Patty never understood. She thought she had destroyed something cheap because it looked ordinary. But the value was not in what she could see from the road. It was in the time, the records, and the research attached to it. When the HOA received the full claim, Patty demanded an emergency meeting. She told residents she was going to prove the university was bluffing. The university's attorney agreed to attend. So did Maya. And she brought the binder. The clubhouse was packed by the time I arrived. Patty stood at the front beside the HOA attorney, with half the board lined up behind her. I sat near the back. Claire's gray binder was on the table beside Maya. Patty opened the meeting with the same confidence she had at my gate. One homeowner has allowed a minor landscaping dispute to spiral into an attack on this entire community. A few residents nodded. Then the university attorney stood. He did not argue with her. He put a county parcel map on the screen. Parcel 18B, he said. Outside HOA jurisdiction. Next came the landscaping invoice. Chemical vegetation clearing. Showcase prep. Then Patty's text. I need it dead before the buyers arrive. The room got quieter. Next came a still image from my barn camera. Patty was standing inside my fence, pointing toward the numbered stakes. Finally, Maya displayed the soil report, showing the chemical spike at 10:14 a.m. Nobody was nodding anymore. Patty shifted in her chair. This still does not explain how some weeds become a $600,000 claim. Maya did not answer immediately. She reached for Claire's binder, opened the faded cover, and said, "They were not weeds." That was when the room finally went silent. Maya turned the binder so the residents could see the first page. Plot 7C has been monitored by State University for 11 years. She showed them the maps, the numbered plants, annual photographs, bloom records, soil readings, genetic sample references. Then she displayed 2 photographs of the same orchid taken years apart. These plants were not decorative landscaping, she said. They were individually tracked research specimens. Someone near the front raised a hand. So you are saying a few rare flowers were worth $600,000? Maya shook her head. No. She placed one hand on Claire's binder. The flowers were not worth $600,000. Then she looked directly at Patty. The research was. The university attorney put the damages summary on the screen. Contaminated soil. Destroyed specimens. Broken longitudinal data. Laboratory work. Restoration. Specialist monitoring. Grant disruption. Everything Patty's bleach had interrupted was listed line by line. At the bottom was the total. $600,000. Nobody said a word. Patty stared at the screen. Then she looked toward the board members sitting beside her. One by one, they looked away. For the first time, her clipboard was not doing anything for her. Then Patty pushed back her chair. I was protecting everyone's property values. That was when I finally stood up. Patty looked straight at me. I was protecting everyone's property values. I walked to the front of the room, not toward her, toward the county parcel map still glowing on the screen. Then I pointed at parcel 18B. Then you should have checked whose property you were standing on. Nobody laughed. That made it worse. A man in the second row raised his hand. Patty, did you know Daniel's land was not part of the HOA? She hesitated. That was enough. The treasurer leaned toward the microphone. The landscaping payment came through our account. Another board member turned to Patty. You told us Daniel had already agreed to the cleanup. Patty's face changed. I said he had been notified. That is not what you told us. Now the board was not defending her. They were protecting themselves. The university attorney closed his folder. The evidence was already on the screen. The texts, the invoice, the camera footage, the research file. Patty had run out of explanations. Then someone from the back of the room said, "Call the vote." And suddenly, the meeting was not about my meadow anymore. It was about whether Patty was still going to be HOA president when she walked out. The motion came from a homeowner Patty had spent years calling one of her strongest supporters. Remove Patty Weller as HOA president. Hire outside counsel. Audit the landscaping account. And require written property verification before the HOA touched anything beyond its recorded boundaries again. The vote was not close. Patty sat perfectly still while hand after hand went up. When it was over, she gathered her clipboard, her folder, and the same real estate flyer she had carried to my gate 3 weeks earlier. Nobody helped her. The financial damage did not disappear with her title. The HOA froze cosmetic landscaping projects and postponed clubhouse upgrades, while attorneys dealt with the university claim, insurance questions, and remediation costs. What Patty had called a cheap cleanup had become a liability approaching $600,000. But that was not the part I remembered most. A few months later, I walked out toward the meadow and found a university crew installing a new sign directly beside the surviving research plot. And it happened to face the exact houses Patty had been trying to give a better view. The new sign was simple. Native Orchid Research Area. State University. Authorized access only. No dramatic warning. No mention of Patty. No mention of the lawsuit. It did not need any. The surviving section of the meadow was fenced, marked, and protected now. And from the back decks of those 3 luxury homes, the research area was impossible to miss. The irony was almost perfect. Patty had poured bleach across my land, because she did not want potential buyers looking at wildflowers. Now those same buyers were asking the realtor, "What is the university studying over there?" The field she had called an eyesore had become the most interesting thing on the block. I stood by the fence one afternoon while a research team checked the new sensors. Maya looked toward the houses and smiled. "Better view?" I laughed for the first time in weeks. Patty had tried to erase that meadow. Instead, she had made sure everyone finally noticed it. But there was still one thing missing. Something Claire deserved to have there long before any of this happened. The university came back that spring with volunteers, students, and a few families from the neighborhood. Nobody called it revenge. They called it restoration. We replanted native species around the damaged area, rebuilt the protective markers, and added new pollinator habitat beyond the contaminated soil. Most of the residents had never known what Patty was doing until that meeting. I did not blame them for her choices. A few even apologized. Near the edge of Plot 7, Maya asked me to come look at something. A small metal plaque had been mounted beside the trail. It read, "Claire Mercer." She noticed what everyone else walked past. I stood there longer than I meant to. Beyond the plaque, a few orchids had survived outside the worst of the bleach. Maya said it could take years before we knew how much of the original population would recover. I looked across the field. For once, that did not bother me. "We have got time," I said. Claire had spent years teaching people to notice what mattered. Patty had spent one morning trying to erase it. In the end, the field outlasted her. Patty thought power came from a clipboard and an HOA title. What stopped her was quieter than that. A camera timestamp, a soil sensor, a county map. A few text messages, and one old research file Claire had kept for 11 years. Patty saw weeds. Claire saw something worth protecting. And eventually, the whole neighborhood saw the difference. So if someone with a little authority ever decides something on your property is worthless, make sure they understand what they are looking at before they destroy it. Because sometimes the smallest thing they ignore is the one piece of evidence that brings everything down. What would you have done in my place?